Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn on integrating affordable multifamily housing and clean energy solutions. This webinar is part of an ongoing series that we at the University of Wisconsin Division of Extension are hosting related to housing challenges in Wisconsin. Briefly, special thanks are in order. This series was made possible in part by a grant from the U.S. Economic Development Administration in support of the EDA University Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And as a friendly reminder, please be sure to mute your microphones. Our presenter today is comfortable with having questions asked during, but if you could hold until the end and also put any comments or questions in the chat, myself and my colleague Todd Johnson will be monitoring the chat, and you can also use the raise hand function, which you can find all those at the bottom of your screen. With that, I'm actually going to turn it over to my colleague Todd Johnson, who will introduce today's presenter. Todd, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Todd Johnson. I'm the Land Use and Community Development Specialist based out of UW River Falls. And I have the pleasure of introducing one of my friends, Mr. Peter Kilde, who is currently the Board of Directors for the CCAP, the Community Action Program for West Central Wisconsin. And he also has a role at the national level as the National Community Action Partnership Board of Directors, which he co-chairs, the Strategic Visions Committee on there. And in a previous life, he did quite a bit of work in sustainability as well. So when he's not trying to help folks find a place to live and helping people who are in poverty, he's also trying to help the environment as well. And today he's going to share with us some of the innovations that he's made in which he's been able to sort of marry both those sort of concepts together, and very successfully at that. And so with that, I'll let him, if he needs to explain or clarify some of the ambiguity that I used in my introduction of him, he can do that. Otherwise, I think you guys will really enjoy and learn something from this guy. He's a really talented person. So with that, Peter.
Well, thank you, Todd and Brandon. It's a great pleasure to be here and talk about this stuff. These are all things that are near and dear to my heart and my life's work. So it's a pleasure to share some of that. I would have to correct Todd one thing. He said I was on the board of directors at WESCAP. I actually am the executive director of WESCAP, but that's quite all right. So just so you know, WESCAP is a community action agency. These guys have been around for a long time with a mission to alleviate poverty. So our service territory is this 7 counties. It's kind of a light greenish gray: Polk, Barron, Chippewa, Dunn, St. Croix. For you global thinkers, just to make it clear, I'm from here. And for the relocalizers, and also to follow up a little bit on Todd's point, I also live on a little organic farm where I sustainably manage about 60 acres of woods, do forage-based grass-fed beef operation most years, suspended a bit with COVID things. So it's a little bit of the kind of personal background. And before coming to WESCAP about 27 years ago now, I was operations director at a place called Wilder Forest, which was a foundation owned and operated 1,200 acre site in Minnesota that did environmental and social concerns, sort of linking those two issues together. So I kind of came to this part of the world and my current job with that orientation, and have kind of carried that forward in my work here at WESCAP. So our agency mission is to take action against poverty by developing the social and economic assets of low-income families in their communities. But a little more to the point, we are also charged in our primary funding from Congress to sort of work on the systems and institutions and causes of poverty that go beyond that. So what brings me here today is the part of that mission that is in green on your screen, which is by working to create a more just and sustainable society. All community action agencies are a little different. They are all locally owned and directed. Todd was a board member. We have board members that are 1/3 elected government officials, 1/3 community members, and 1/3 low-income people themselves were elected by other low-income people. It's a very unusual structure. It's mandated by our core funding, the Community Services Block Grant. So we always have those three sectors represented and kicking around the ideas that include the people that are most impacted. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we've been around for 60 years at this point. So our particular agency does a number of things. The one we'll be talking about mostly today has to do with community housing development and management. We also run the energy assistance program in 6 of our 7 counties, plus a couple other counties on the side. We were the first federally funded weatherization program in America by a few minutes, as it turned out, but the first nonetheless. And there are now about 600 agencies that do this work. We still are innovators, frankly, and I'll talk about some of that innovation a little bit. We've been at this for a long time. We weatherize with our own crews about 350 homes a year in our 7 counties. We also have a lot to do with food access and resources. We support about 40 different food pantries. We run the federal emergency food assistance program in our 7 counties. We also run a commodities program. We do things around, we actually operate the Menominee Farmers Market. So we have a lot to do with sort of local food production and access as well. One of our areas of activity that's about as big as the weatherization is homeless intervention. So again, a lot of our work does have to do with housing one way or another, whether it's weatherization, creating housing development. We own and manage ourselves about 300 units of affordable housing right now that we've created, plus another 100 or so that we do with another management company. And I'll talk about that a little bit too. Then we have a relatively small literacy and skills enhancement program operating in, most of it's in all 7 of our counties. So our agency was set up, again, in 1965, and we were doing very early work long before I got here on alternative energies back in the oil crisis in the 70s. When I showed up, we just kind of started getting into the housing development activity. We were our own developers. I'll get back to that too. 2007, during the housing crisis at the time, there was a lot of money around for kind of renovating properties that were in foreclosure. And one of the little uses that was possible, just mentioned on the list of things you could do with that money, was energy efficiency improvements. So I took that little thing and ran with it. And at the time, the common wisdom was that we needed to get carbon parts per million down to around 450, and an 80% reduction in fossil fuel was required. So I set that out as a target, and we did this pilot project where we took existing housing, and this kind of gets back to that part of our title of this particular presentation around energy conservation measures and energy efficiency world, in a broader sense. We'll be talking mostly about new housing development, but 95% of the housing is existing housing. And there's an amazing amount of work that can be done to greatly increase the energy efficiency of existing housing. So there are a couple of examples here. The house in the upper right of this slide had been a large doctor's home here in Glenwood City. We turned it into a duplex. Those are air source heaters on the ends. That also has some solar panels, and it has direct solar hot water system. Down the lower left, we took half a duplex that was in foreclosure, and that little unit you see under the window on the left there is an air source heat pump that hardly anybody knew about back in those days. We paid some early adopter prices. That unit failed. The company went out of business, and we ended up having to replace it. But that has come a long way since then, and works pretty well. The larger building in the middle, in that same project, we built one house that was net zero. And this house we still own. We own all these properties. We rent them to low-income people and moderate-income people. This home we own still and rent out in Menominee, and it's still working great. It's all these properties actually have been very successful in terms of their performance, both in energy, but the fact that people like them. You know, we have a lot of rental properties, and these are the ones that are just almost always full. People come and they don't go away. One of our kind of a flagship project on this particular, deep retrofit was this duplex in Menominee. These are 4 bedrooms on a side. And we kind of went all out here. We put a geothermal heating and cooling system in. We get 95% efficient ventilation systems. We ripped off all the siding and put on what we call a remote wall, added 2 inches insulation on the outside, re-sided it, put in high efficiency windows. And then I always think the thing looks a little bit like a 747 taking off. You get all the flaps up there. Most of those are solar panels. And then the 4 panels that are at a slightly different angle are the direct solar source water heaters. But a couple of things about this particular structure. Through most of the time that we've had this, it's been rented by the county of Menominee for their basically mentally disabled residential programs. And the last bill I saw, electric bill for that entire project, was $9. That was $9 for the year. Okay. So, I mean, it just brings these energy costs to nothing. And again, in terms of, it's sort of one of those deals again, where as near as I can tell, everybody comes out ahead. This was a great project for local contractors. They learned a lot. I've been doing this in some other places, provides great housing for a population that needs it, takes energy costs down. And oh, by the way, helps to mitigate climate change for everybody. And that's what I like so much about this particular field, is there are no losers. Everybody benefits from these activities. It hasn't quite been captured yet by the finance world. It's getting there. I remember in this project, we wanted to borrow a little extra money beyond what we were able to get through the neighborhood stabilization program. So we bought the place for $100,000 roughly, and we spent another just over $100,000 on all of these measures to get it to net zero. And the house appraised with the extra $100,000. The appraisal value went up from $100,000 to $120,000. Okay, they just failed to capture the value of this stuff over time. We've been working on that problem ever since, and that will take us into the discussion ultimately of our current multifamilies.
Hey, Peter, if I can
Yeah.
interrupt you for a second, there's a couple
Please.
of questions out there.
Sure.
The first one was, are you moving the housing to electrification then, given air source heat pumps?
Yes.
And then the second question was, how are the first costs for geothermal and ASHPs financed?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
If people can hold on to that a little bit, what I'm doing is kind of give you a little survey in terms of our activities and what we've done and whatnot. And then the next whole section will be specifically drilling down on a project that's is exactly those technologies and what we're doing now. So great question, answer forthwith. I would want to mention that one project we did that was a little unique. We were asked by the 2 co-located institutions in Rice Lake, UW Barron, and WITC, and needed student housing. And we were able to put together a project that for this 96-bed student housing project that has basically geothermal heated and cooled systems. We have 72 vertical wells under the parking lot. And again, in terms of the energy operating costs, plus we did a lot of other things energy efficiency, appliances, lights, extra insulation, all that kind of stuff. But it's made this remarkably inexpensive to operate. And again, everybody comes out ahead on that kind of a proposition. So this gets us a little closer to what we're talking about. This particular project is now under construction in New Richmond. It's called Dakota Meadows. Again, it's a 50 unit of about 40 units of those are in this particular building. There will be a couple smaller buildings that are on grade. And this is just an architect's rendering of what we're doing in solar panels up there. This is not our greenest building. I'll come back to that. And it has to do with the exact question that Todd, you raised in the chat and how you pay for this stuff. A project that we expect to build. We have most of the funding lined up, and we're trying to do as a net zero project is Prairie Heights in Eau Claire. This will be a 60 unit project. Everything's at 80% of county median income or less. So it's workforce housing and affordable. Our expectation here is that we'll be able to get about 35 to 40% of the electricity on site using the panel array you see on the roof here. And those kind of funny cartwheel things in the lawn are called smart flowers. Those are solar panel things that open up in the morning and follow the sun. And then we are working with a couple of community solar developers for the rest. So the project, generates what it can on site and gets the rest through local community solar. Which gets us finally to the project that probably got more folks' attention and led ultimately to this event today. Project that we completed last spring is 1,300 residences in River Falls. And I'll say a couple things about it. First, you can see from the aerial view that, we've covered the thing with solar panels. We got 580 solar panels on this structure. This is a 50 unit structure. 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms are all at 80% or less county median. 10 of them are at 30%, so it's very low income. Very nice amenities, underground parking, community rooms, all that kind of stuff. We put these smart flowers out there. They were found by the architect because nobody from the ground can see any of the solar panels. And we wanted people to know that we're doing that here. So, and these things do attract a lot of attention. And, they're very cool. The sun comes up in the morning, they're all folded up. They open up, they swing around. And at night they close up and clean themselves. And between you and me on the wall and the 9,000 people listening, it's not the most efficient use of your solar dollar. They're very expensive, but at the same time, they've done a great deal to draw attention to this project and the values that we're trying to communicate. One of the few things probably I wrote that will survive me is the language on this bronze and aluminum plaque. But I would draw your attention to it a little bit. This project, first of all, as it says in the title of the slide, the community action agencies every year get an award from the governor. This is the first time that we've ever had a housing project that was able to get that award. Usually they're for other kinds of programs. And then the Governor's Commission on Rural Prosperity also signaled out this particular project for a number of reasons, not least of which because it needed workforce housing. River Falls did a study that expected to need another 1,500 units of housing by 2030. They were very welcoming. And I wanted to note on here that at least the last sentence on this plaque, because it has a lot to do with our orientation to these things, which is, I always want to be putting affordable housing in that's viewed as an asset to the community, not a liability. It's not an eyesore. We don't build low quality housing for anybody. And again, in this case, we're very closely partnered with the Girard Corporation. They've been a great partner on this particular project and on advancing these renewable energy technologies in all these projects. But we, dedicate the cost savings and environmental benefits of this project to those who call this place home, to the community of River Falls, and to the future we all share. And that's the value orientation we bring into these projects. Again, the technologies, if you look on the upper right, those big industrial looking things there are commercial air source heat pumps. So if you're not familiar with that technology, it's basically the same kind of technology as air conditioner, where in air conditioner, it takes the heat out of your house and blows it outside. In the winter times, these do the opposite. They take the heat out of the air and blow it inside. You can reverse them, and they do exactly the opposite in the summer and take the heat out of the air inside and put it outside. As I understand the technology, and I'm not an expert on this, but the Steiner who put this in, a big contractor in River Falls, basically said that if you look at the energy of the entire system, the heating and cooling, and what is involved in that particular energy transfer, 80% of that is free energy from the air. The other 20% is the electricity. We generate the electricity. In this case, 40% of this building's electricity is provided on site. It's just, that's all the space there is. It's a geographic limitation. But that 40% also is utilizing, energy source. As I like to put it, the price of sunlight never goes up. So it's a hedge not only against shorter term energy costs, but also future volatility. As fossil fuel extraction becomes more problematic, either through depletion or through the anticipated regulations and limitations of climate change and supplies and all that kind of stuff. If you put these systems in place that basically are relying on those other fuel sources, it's a tremendous hedge against volatility and future price increase. So you get kind of a double magnifier effect in terms of the cost savings by using one kind of renewable energy to make the electricity, another kind, the ambient air temperature as the other source of energy. So that's why we're pretty excited about this technology, and we've been trying to put it in projects going forward.
So Peter, there's another question,
Yep.
And it has to do with the air source heat pumps. The question is, are air source heat pumps cost effective in a northern climate? One HVAC installer told me you'd also need a furnace below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'd love to know.
Okay. Again, I'm not an engineer on this particular project. My understanding on this is that, they've advanced the air source heat pump technology a lot. You can get heat out of energy down to well below zero. But for when it's, super cold and you can't get enough heat to meet your heating needs. And part of that has to do with your ability to insulate systems and limit your heat loss. Having a backup gas-fired boiler or something like that is still important. Okay.
And I see that Sherry Gruder has also said that there are cold climate ASHPs good to 5 degrees, then work as electric.
Yep. So, they keep being able to push that down. You got to, remember that absolute zero is 367 degrees below zero. There is a lot of energy in 0 degrees, air. It just takes more energy to get it out. Okay. That's part of it. So you can either oversize the system or augment. One thing that we and I think this may be true in this case, and I'm sorry I don't have an exact answer for you on this particular technology, but I think they have some resistance coil heat in there for those super cold moments and periods of the winter where you have to augment a little bit, you know. So I would refer you, again, I can get you connected with our engineering firm, which is Energy Concepts out of Hudson, who did all the engineering work, probably give people a better answer on that.
So if I could just say, Peter, that this is Sherry, that EPA is really promoting cold climate air source heat pumps. They're doing a lot of research, and I'll put on the Energy on Wisconsin site a lot of links for this, but they do work in our climate. They run much slower and less efficient when it's below 5 or 15 degrees below zero, but they still do work, and you don't need to have necessarily have a backup. They just work differently.
Right.
So
And my assumption,
you don't set them down at night like you would a normal furnace, for instance. You keep them at par temperature. But anyway, it's probably more detail than anybody wants.
no, that's great. Well, thanks, Sherry. Yeah, and this has been a changing field. I know for a while, you know, the first generation, like in our experience, we put these on in 2008, and you know, they worked for about 5 years and failed. But they really have advanced that a lot. And, you know, we had looked initially on this project in River Falls of doing geothermal. And again, you'd have to have, I think it was 150 wells, you know, drilled into the site. The conditions weren't great, and that was very expensive. And being able to use the air source heat pumps in this way was a tremendous cost savings. Overall, in our calculation, it looks like the added cost over conventional heating and cooling systems would pay for itself in energy cost savings in about 7 years. And after that, you get another 30 years of free energy. So it's, you know, it's a good deal on the financial economic side. You know, we don't exactly finance it that way. You know, we spread it out a little bit more, but if you were to look at it just in terms of how long it takes you to recoup that investment, that's sort of what we're looking at there. So a little bit on what it takes to get one of these built. The first thing I put up there is an experienced developer willing and able to take considerable financial risk. When we first got into affordable housing development back in the mid-90s, we were the developers. And I'll spare you the details of the story that almost turned my hair gray, but over a couple of years, we ran into some situations where the risk was high, that we weren't entirely sure that we were going to be able to save projects we put a lot of money into. Managed to get all of that back on track. All the projects we've ever built are up, they're running, we still own them, they still work and all of that. But putting all of our other programs at risk, and we serve about 25,000 people a year. For this one program is just something I decided I didn't want to do anymore. And the board certainly had the same position. So we sort of laid off for a while until the Gerard Corporation got a hold of us. We were doing a little bit of affordable housing development as a nonprofit sponsor in Chippewa Falls with one private developer, and River Falls with another private developer. And those were okay, but not great, and not projects that we owned or managed. We just, you know, helped them out a little bit in terms of bringing in some funding. Gerard came along with a little different vision. They really shared a lot of our values going in, and they had the capacity to absorb almost all of the risk. There's very little risk in us for working with these guys. What they do is they do all the development work, so we don't have to have a development staff. all the applications, all the siting, all the funding, the design, the construction, everything, up until the project is basically proven itself to be economically viable for 3 months, in which case we become the managing partner with the investors, and then eventually we'll own the project. So that's the model that we currently operate on. And we've kind of pushed each other back and forth on advancing the renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies. It's been a lot of fun. They keep digging up new stuff. I always have crazy ideas. And we have been pushing the envelope and actually pushing the field a little bit to make this kind of thing work. But just to give you a sense, we put a huge effort into getting a project in place in Ellsworth. We were probably 35, 40,000 into that in terms of the cost that the developer put in. And one of the funding sources that we had to have, these are competitive. We got a score of 190 on that particular competitive application, and the cutoff is 191. Okay. So missed by a point. And fortunately, our development partner is also tenacious and didn't accept that as being the end of the story. And we're back at it on another round here. But you have to be able to take that kind of risk. And I talked to Paul Gerard this morning, and he's saying it depends a little bit on the project, anywhere from, $20,000 to $85,000, they will be, they risk if it doesn't get funded, and they just walk away. And then these guys also are able sometimes to do bridge loaning and that kind of stuff to get from one funding source to another. So that's a huge part of it. You have to have a developer who's willing and able to take that risk. And these are incredibly complex deals. We have multiple funding sources. I'll get to that in a couple minutes. Second thing I'd say is a trusted local nonprofit advocating for the project that is able and willing to participate. What makes this important is, with just one or two funding sources, or even just privately funded, you can build a, for lack of a better term, cheap project. Put electric resistance heat in there, poorly insulated, flat walls, the kind of thing that tends to be unappreciated in the communities where they find themselves. You can do that kind of work. If you want to build a project like this, okay, like the 1300 River Falls, these 200 projects that I showed you on the drawing boards, the one we're building right now in New Richmond, you have to be able to get all the other funding sources. And a lot of those, you need to have a nonprofit sponsor willing, with some experience, it's also credible and all that kind of stuff, to be able to bring in those extra funds. I'll go over that in some detail, but in some of these cases, we are actually the grantee. We turn around and loan that money then to the project. You have to have just all the places, all the funding sources lined up to make it work. You also need a welcoming and supportive community. If folks want this kind of thing, they can be extremely helpful in terms of local funding, in terms of waiving of fees, in terms of helping to find land. And in the case of that project in River Falls, the city actually went so far as to reduce the speed. It's actually the main drag that runs next to that house. They knocked the speed limit down to 25 and put up a bus stop for their municipal transportation. So, there's just a lot of ways that they can be helpful if they want you there. And there's a whole lot of ways that they can be unhelpful if they don't. I've had a few hot, sweaty nights in August in front of planning committees back in the day that I will retain for a long time. And one vote, one way or another, made the difference in the whole project work. So the other thing you need, of course, is lots of money. To be specific, for that 1300 project in River Falls, We needed $11,424,866 to make the thing work. The sources of that, and I'll touch on this briefly, we're getting near the end here. One is a WIDA first mortgage. In this case, I'll back up a little bit. What you basically look for to make affordable housing actually affordable for the people to live there, there are kind of two large approaches. One is there are programs that subsidize rent. So if you are in a Section 8 program, then people pay only a third of their income for rent. The rest is paid by the government. That's one kind of subsidy. More common in what we do generally, we do operate Section 8 for a couple counties, is you subsidize the cost of construction so that the operating costs and debt service make it possible for you then to rent these at much lower rates to different segments of the economic population. So once you get all those pieces together that act sort of as grants to the project, then you have to borrow what's left to make it work. So in this case, the first thing I listed here is the WIDA first mortgage. WIDA, in some sense, acts kind of like a bank here. And they do compete with commercial lenders. In our project in New Richmond, we're working with Bremer Bank, a different private bank. In our project in Eau Claire, we got yet another bank and equity investor. So that's basically just acts like a regular 30-year mortgage. The tax credit equity thing, this could be kind of a long story, but the federal government produces offers to states, gives to states an allocation of low-income housing tax credits. This is extremely competitive. Wisconsin gets about $32 million a year. Over in an average year, there may be 20 projects funded, and maybe 2 or 3 of those historically have been northwest of Madison, Milwaukee, Green Bay, that, the southeast part of the state. So it's extremely competitive. Again, this is also why you need a nonprofit. They can bring a lot of things that add points. It's also why you need a cooperative community to build in. They also add points. Okay. So the tax credit investors, I won't spend too much time on this because it can be extremely detailed, but basically if that building, they get their tax credits over 10 years. So we got 3.7 million. So every year that company, the investors are able to take 374,000 as tax credits for 10 years. The project has to stay in compliance with the low income and services and all the things you agree to get that money for another 5 years. After that, the general model is they sell us the building for $1 and we take it from there. In the state of Wisconsin, they also have a state tax credit program we were able to benefit from. It's at a lower rate of return. WIDA also trying to have a hazard program called the Capital Magnet Fund to kind of reward people for bringing in other capital to make a project work. HP is the Affordable Housing Program of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago. They were mandated after the savings and loan crisis in the 80s to put 10% of their profits towards affordable housing projects. I've had a lot to do with that program. I chaired their Affordable Housing Council 20 years ago. But they are extremely helpful. And again, this is money that's basically awarded to us and loaned for the project. HOME is another federal program administered by the State Department of Administration. What they do is they subsidize specific units, 10 units in this case at $50,000 a unit, to allow those to be very low rent. This is to subsidize projects so they can get down to like the 30% level or something. And then in the case of River Falls, again, going back to the supportive community, they have tax increment finance funding. And And, this was a generous funding that we got from the city that, again, is ultimately paid back, but in very favorable terms, which is what gets us to that 11 million. So like I say, it's housing development is not for the faint of heart. Let's put it that way. You really have to be serious about it. But, if you put all the pieces together, you get the kind of thing that we're talking about here in River Falls. What else does it take? Well, these days I like to point out a little extrinsic motivation from a realistic understanding of what's in store if we don't up our game in climate change. And it's serious. And this basically is what, climate change does to affordable housing, in case you're wondering. Particular thing happened in the Bahamas a couple of years ago, but that's basically, what we're looking at here. Pretty much what I have to share at this point, and I'm more than happy in the remaining time to take any questions, comments, or whatever.
Well, thank you,
Just
Peter.
sorry, Todd. Real quick, there was a question that came up. It was sent in directly to me, and the question was, what does a community have to have in place to attract a developer? I assume for a project like this. So if you have any advice on that front.
Well, there's a lot of pieces in this. Some of the things that a community has to have is it has to have a, infrastructure, location. There are ways that communities can be supportive that, things like waiving of park fees, if it's affordable housing, the kind of support that I was talking about in terms of lowering the speed limit, putting in a bus stop. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are the community control. A lot of our communities have municipal utilities. So particularly if you're working with these renewable systems where there may be buyback or something, the municipality is able to provide support for your project through the utility allowances, buyback rates, that kind of thing. Ultimately, you also need to have a economic base that makes the numbers work. So, and this is an area of policy that needs to be addressed. It's very hard to make a tax credit project work these days in a lower income community, okay? So we're very successful in Hudson, we're very successful in River Falls, we're very successful in Eau Claire, but these are all communities that have a higher end economic base under them. You get to some communities where you don't have those median incomes, you can't support the very low income units that you need to have in order to score on the application to get the points. It's a little convoluted, and I hope I'm being kind of clear on that, but ultimately, it's much harder to make these projects work in financially less advantaged communities. And we're finding that in the western part of our service territory. You get up into Barron, you get up into northern Dunn County, that kind of thing. We've wanted to do construction in these areas, and it's a math problem. It just doesn't work. So, there are other things that communities can do. We've brought focus on energy funding in on this project. Sometimes private foundation help. Towns on some of our projects have donated land because they want to bring the project in. That helps score points. It also brings down the cost of the development, those kind of things.
So another question that came up, Peter, in the chat, and this is more of I think a definition question, is the scenario tax credit equity new market tax credits?
No.
No. Okay.
These are low income housing tax credits, LIHTC.
Thank you.
Program's been around about 30 years, I think. I don't know much about the new market tax credit program. We've looked at it a little bit. It's hard to make it work for this kind of project, at least in our experience, and it has to do with what areas have been designated. It's a complex world, and I say there are other models. There's, USDA has some funding models for certain kinds of housing and other things. I just don't know that much about. This is the one that we are most familiar with. This is what's worked for us. And then, there's, banks sometimes are looking for community reinvestment credit, can provide some favorable financing. I think we're getting some of that in Eau Claire, frankly, for that project. So, most of the reason I kind of presented this model out here is an example of a thing that worked. And there are other examples around, but frankly, if they were easier than this one to do, we'd do those. They're not. It's all, it takes a lot of commitment.
Well, does anybody else have any questions for Peter while we have him?
So I must have nailed it. I answered all the questions about everything for this complex thing. That's really, I really feel good about that. Thanks.
Well, it looks like Andrew would like it.
Andrew.
Yep.
Hi. Thanks, Peter. That was a nice overview. Exciting to see what you've been up to here in the last decade or so since we've crossed paths. But my question is, or for you or others, what would be like, I'm just kind of curious if you break this down to like a per unit basis. You talked about it certainly costs more upfront to build quality. Hopefully that pays for itself, or it does pay for itself over the longer term. But I'm just kind of curious if you have any benchmarks in your head or thoughts on the cost per unit, what that difference might be, or what you've found in terms of doing these higher or nicer, higher quality projects in terms of a cost per unit basis versus more standard approach.
Well, I do know what these cost per unit. The cost per unit for the 1300 River Falls project is almost exactly $240,000 a unit. And those are 1, 2, and 3 bedroom. And again, this is in a building that shares common walls, common roof, that kind of thing. So it's pretty expensive. Now, I don't know offhand how that would compare with, the least cost, minimal building code kind of a project, with just straight walls and, a couple stories high, no elevator and no amenities, that kind of thing. My guess is it's about double. But that's more of a hunch than anything. I wish I had a more definitive answer for you, but I don't.
Thanks.
Then I see that Brandon Nielsen's got a hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I think this question would be for Peter or maybe anybody. What I'm interested in is like in a single family home, for instance, if somebody wanted to install a cold climate heat pump, do you have any insight on that particular installation? And like, I guess what I'm asking more than anything is like, so they have their existing ducts in the wall from their conventional furnace. Does that heat pump just link right into those ducts and provide heat to the entire home, depending, if it was a large enough system?
It's my understanding that you can run this heat into a variety of systems. So it's pretty easy, for example, to channel that into a in-floor radiant heat system where you've got water or liquid that gets heated into the floor. That's very efficient. You can also, you can put it into air, you can put it into water heater. It's possible to take the heat that comes, or the cooling for that matter, from these systems and connect it to just about anything, as I understand. Talk to me in a couple of years because I want to do this in my house.
If I could add to that, the Energy Star label that's on everything is about to be on air source heat pumps and on cold climate air source heat pumps. And EPA has come out with a heat pump guide, and they also have a consumer product finder, and so they could help you find the right heat pump for an individual house. And this is a huge thrust. This is the way to move to electrification and get us off of natural gas, and also,
Right.
The rural housing that's on propane. And so you're going to see a lot of that. And there's just a really big push for it now. And so there are resources out there, and I'm going to be, again, listing them on under resources and energy efficiency on the Energy on Wisconsin website. I keep adding more and more to them as they've been coming out. This is also a big area of funding for the Biden administration. So there's already federal funding that's going to start moving toward education and actually working with the installers and helping them as well.
I think one source, again, if you also want to connect to, how you power that air source heat pump, if you're using solar panels or something, the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, located in Custer, Wisconsin, has also been a good resource. You also know a lot of contractors. So, and what Sherry is saying has certainly been my experience as well, that, the air source heat pump thing seems to be the emerging technology out of many that is most promising in terms of wide adoption and cost and retrofitting and that kind of thing. So we're excited about it too. Thanks, Sherry.
Other thing are heat pump water heaters. So whichever one is about to die in your house the soonest, go with heat pump. I just put a heat pump water heater in, and actually so did Brandon. So, and if you don't have solar and you have access to a community solar project that you can purchase that energy at a fixed rate for 25 years from your utility, that's another option if you can't afford to put solar on until we get third-party financing, at which point it won't cost you anything. And there's a bill right now going through our state legislature on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. And I should have mentioned that in the question earlier on what can a community do? You are seeing communities like River Falls, Richmond, Eau Claire. Those are the ones I'm familiar with. Dunn Electric is doing has done a large, and will be doing a larger community solar. Being able to connect into that, if you don't have the geography or the ability necessarily to put the PV on site. I mean, I live on a little farm and probably didn't see it in my quick slide, but they've got a 16-panel solar array that provides about 70% of the electricity we use on the farm. And I've augmented the rest of it by buying into the community solar panels of Dunn Electric, and can get up at this point to 90%, which is their max. So there are a number of ways to cut the cat, skin the cat, and this would be one of them. But I think the advantage again of the community solar is the word community. It engages everybody around the same common goal, and everybody has the same benefit in terms of the environmental impact and climate change and all those kind of things. So I think that is a great component in terms of making these things work. You don't necessarily have to have it all, be able to produce it all on your building that you got in place.
I see that Linda has a question for everyone out there. On a related note, how much pushback by utilities is there in the Northwest Wisconsin area against renewables, seeing some anti-campaigning in rural Dane County? Does anybody have any information about that?
I don't have any concrete information. There was a fair amount of pushback on wind systems that were being proposed in our part of the state. for a while, and so they all went other places. Haven't seen as much on the solar, community solar, which tends to be what's happening to a much greater degree around here. I think part of it is, people may have some instincts against it, but at the same time, all the arguments around the visibility and, killing birds or you name it, you just can't do that with a fixed solar array. They just sit there quite benignly. So, and also I think things are changing a little bit. That's my sense around here. We're doing these projects in, rural northern Wisconsin, right? And that's not an area that's, notably liberal in its demographic or anything else, and people like it.
Nathan has a comment for everyone here. It's a question, I guess. Does the quality and efficiency align well with this being an investment of public dollars? And then he says in parentheses, your statement of dedication on that plaque comes to mind. And then hang on. My earlier clumsy attempt at typing maybe a dart. Oh, sorry. So quality and efficiency, does it align well with being an investment of public dollars?
Well, it kind of goes back to the earlier slide on, is this what people want, right? So if you are concerned about the future and the impact of climate change, if you need workforce housing that's affordable, if you want housing in your community that is seen as an asset, not a blight or this kind of thing, that's what this kind of a project can provide. So it's really, it's a matter of what the public, how the public defines its interest. Okay.
Might I add to that this is a way to promote climate equity, and the fact is that in a lot of places in Wisconsin, people are paying the low income, elderly BIPOC communities are paying a higher amount for their energy in proportion to what they take home than most people. So it's called energy burden, and this is a way to reduce those costs so that it frees up money for them. And it is a way, it is a movement toward equity in a very big way. The people who are being impacted most by climate events are not the ones who have caused them, but have had to live with the health implications of, coal in their backyard and highways by their houses and that type of thing.
So I want to say thank you. I like to try to keep these on time, and we're about 1 minute to sign off. So thank you everyone who stuck around to the end. If Peter has a minute or two to stick around after, if there are any lingering questions, he'd be happy to do that. Again, I want to say thank you everyone for joining us, and especially thank you, Peter. This was a wonderful presentation, and I saw a little snippet of this earlier, maybe in the fall, and the information that you provided is just incredible. Hence the reason we had so many people turn out. For those who are interested, there will be a follow-up in terms of this recording will be placed on our website along with the slides that Peter had shared. And so look for that in about a week, and I'll send that out to anyone who is on this call. So with that, thank you, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.